Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Eater, and on behalf of the Basic Needs Advisory Committee and its chair, David Goldblum, and the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, I want to welcome each and every one of you to today's discussion. In case you don't know about the Basic Needs Committee, a few funders began meeting centering around basic needs prior to the onset of COVID. Our goal became twofold. One was to raise money to be granted for basic needs through nonprofit providers. Our committee's definition of basic needs includes, but is not limited to, food and shelter, clothing, hygiene, non-prescription drugs and other essential healthcare items, and cash assistance through gift cards. Combining our most recent two grant cycles, which were calendar year 2021 and 2022, the Basic Needs Advisory Committee has awarded over $750,000 for basic needs and currently has an endowment of over $3.5 million. Our second goal was to educate other donors about the importance of basic needs. And very simply put, if one is hungry or one lacks shelter, it'll be so much more difficult for our amazing not-for-profit organizations to help that individual or family in all the ways that they do so. Our funder group soon realized that we needed the advice and experience of providers to enhance our group so that we could be as effective as possible. So we then added a number of providers, rounding out our team with their great knowledge and experience. One of those community team members happens to be today's moderator, the Reverend Todd Foster. So Todd, please introduce yourself and let's begin the program. Thank you.
Very good. And thank you, Andy. Thank you not only for that introduction, but for the work that you have done for a multitude of years and continue to do. Thank you to the Community Foundation. Thank you to all of the service providers who are on the line with us today. It is certainly a community effort to keep the community alive and well and in health. Yes, I am Reverend Todd Foster. I serve as the missions director of the Storehouse Project, which is the community outreach arm of Cornerstone Christian Center in Milford, Connecticut. I also serve on the Basic Needs Advisory Committee as a community representative. So welcome everyone to the virtual donor briefing on the state of basic needs in our community. Perfect storm, and that's a pretty accurate term to describe it, is having a deleterious economic effect on so many people, on our constituents, on the organizations, on the community at large. Just yesterday, to give you an example and kind of set a framework for the kinds of things that we're talking about, on our church website, we received a prayer request regarding a single mom with 3 boys. The youngest of those boys has a serious medical condition that requires surgery that's going to take place in a couple of weeks. Now, she was evicted and was supposed to be out of her apartment last Friday. She had no place to go. And so she's still there. And the world to her, like mountains on every side of her, are caving in on top of her. And all of you who provide services can relate to that story because unfortunately it's not atypical. It's happening more and more frequently that people's worlds are being disrupted and they're losing hope, and they're in dire situations and straits and need some help. So everywhere we turn, people are hurting and losing hope and operating in a climate of despair, and a very unhealthy climate of despair. It's devastating enough to lose the roof over your head, but to lose hope, to not be able to see light at the end of your tunnel is what many people are facing today. And we wonder why there's a mental health crisis. According to a Pew Research Center poll taken this past September and October, at the national level, 1 in 4 US parents say that there have been times in the past year when they could not afford food for their family or needed to pay their rent or mortgage, the money needed to pay their rent or mortgage. Similar percentage, 24% said they've struggled to pay for health care that their family needed. And 20% said that they couldn't afford childcare. Factor in the recent removal of COVID-related incremental SNAP benefits in the face of astronomical inflation, and we already know that without intervention, the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. On average, families stand to lose roughly $90 per month in SNAP benefits. Some are going to lose a lot more than that or have lost. Here at the local level, the struggle is real. Today, we had the privilege of hearing from a very small but representative sample of guest panelists who work in the center of the storm, trying to mitigate the pain among the increasing number of suffering families. We have with us Ian Brooks from Masters Manna, Emily Byrne from the Connecticut Voices for Children, and Margaret Middleton of the Columbus House. So we're going to start with introductions. And thank you all, panelists, not only for being here today, but also for the redeeming work that you do along with the multitudes who are on the line today, or in the same business of providing a safety net for folks. So if you would briefly introduce yourselves, we'll go in alphabetical order: Brooks, Byrne, and Middleton. Can you briefly introduce yourself, your name, your organization, your position in the organization, and tell us the primary basic needs and any secondary needs addressed in the fulfillment of your organization's mission? For example, as a faith-based organization, the Storehouse Project is all about sharing the love of Christ. That may come in the form of groceries one day, but sometimes it's about just affirming someone's dignity or restoring hope or helping them work through the pardon and parole process. So we'll start with you, Ian, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Reverend Foster. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's terrific of the Community Foundation to put together this forum. It's so needed that we all share. We understand that we are not in it alone ourselves, and we need to look at the resources that we can share as we can find them. Masters Manna is a food pantry in Wallingford. We're one of the larger food pantries in the state, serving 80 to 100 people a day, 4 days a week, year round. In addition, we have a soup kitchen 3 days a week. Obviously, that ties in with the food pantry hours that we can become a one-stop shop. Secondarily, we have a very large clothing program off-site. And finally, we offer healthcare through Community Health Center on-site. They built a room specially in our place. They have the key. All services we offer are free. All services are by choice of our shoppers, consumers. Thank you.
Very good. And next, is it Emily we have next up in line?
Thank you so much, Pastor Foster, and want to echo thanks to the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and Andy and the Basic Needs Fund for the invitation and opportunity to talk about these really important issues. Emily Byrne, I'm the Executive Director of Connecticut Voices for Children. Voices is a research-based advocacy organization. We call ourselves a think and do tank. We're located in New Haven, right around the corner from the foundation. At Voices, we believe that every policy and every funding decision should lead us to the future we want, which is a fair and just society where all children reach their full potential. And so we work in the state and nationally to advance economic justice. We know that justice is a horizon, not a destination. And so we prioritize the intersectional issues that center family economic security, like affordable housing, criminal justice, fair employment, and tax equity. We do this because while what my colleagues in the direct service spaces do every day is absolutely essential, and I see a number of folks also joined on the call, our goal should be to live in a world, a country, a state that doesn't require our organizations to exist. And so this means that the policies that govern our systems need to change. And that's where we come in. As researchers and advocates, we believe that when we research, advocate for, and resource an array of equitable policies, we do in fact get closer to the future we want. And so we don't do this work alone. We understand that systems change can only be sustained through movements and building wide and deep partnerships with values-aligned organizations. And so I'm really excited to see a number of our friends and allies on this call, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. And Margaret.
Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Middleton, CEO of Columbus House, and really grateful, Reverend Foster, for your leading this panel today, and to the fund and also to the foundation for this opportunity to talk about the really important issues affecting people in our community. At Columbus House, we serve just under 3,000 people a year, households a year, experiencing homelessness across New Haven, Middlesex, Hartford, and New London counties. Our primary mission is to serve that individual crisis of homelessness in the moment, to serve the urgent crisis. And many people think of that mission as being about providing shelter, and that's certainly a core part. We're really looking out for the whole person, and our philosophy is one that is person-centered. And we hope to not only help people fulfill their goals in terms of their housing outcome and establishing permanent housing, but also in terms of their other personal aspirations when it comes to employment and family connection. The number one thing that we provide, in my opinion, and it speaks to what you said, Pastor Foster, and also to, the part of the conversation we're going to have today is human connection, because the people who are experiencing homelessness in our community are disenfranchised in every possible way. It's not just that they're experiencing homelessness, but they have been failed or abandoned or kicked out of every system that we have, essentially. Like they've been marginalized to an extreme degree, and that isolation is part of what we're helping them overcome. And so what we provide is a person who knows how to navigate the systems, is committed to helping them navigate the systems, and is intent on establishing a connection based on personal trust and responsibility that they can count on while they're on this journey. In terms of the greatest needs that we are trying to address, obviously addressing the immediate crisis of homelessness, but we're also entirely committed to ending homelessness in our community. And we understand that that is primarily a function of the lack of deeply affordable housing in our community. And so we are committed to both developing and advocating for the creation of deeply affordable housing all over Connecticut, understanding that that is the only way that we will end homelessness.
Thank you so much. Yeah, crucial issues. You're all involved with issues that are affecting an increasing number of people. Back in June, middle of the year, there was a roundtable held that was determined to find out what those who are providing services are facing in this environment. On that list came out topics such as the workforce crisis, some of the things that you all have already mentioned, inflation, collaboration or lack thereof among basic needs providers, escalating mental health issues, affordable housing, and the end of COVID-related benefits, such as I mentioned, the reduction in SNAP benefits. So the confluence of very real issues is causing everyone to have to make some very real, very difficult decisions. I'm talking about hurting families. I'm talking about service providers. I'm talking about legislators. All of us are having to make some very serious decisions. The word choices comes to mind as I think about the perilous economic times in which we find ourselves. The families we serve are having to decide whether they're going to pay the mortgage or rent or buy groceries, an unfortunate but very real decision, a choice that has to be made. We as social service organizations would like to be able to do more for families we serve, but the reality causes us to have to choose carefully between what we can and what we can't realistically do. At the local, state, and federal government levels, they have to make decisions too, and we'll get into that a little bit, decisions that will ultimately impact the well-being of many, many households. So choices, we're talking about choices. Choices, like all choices, have both rewards and consequences. From your own experience, panelists, and your perspectives, can you share with us unfortunate choices that your organization or your constituents are having to face right now? Ian, we'll start with you. We'll go in the same order. Ian, Emily, and Margaret.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say, we, our organization, echo so much of what you're saying. The need is to maintain program and to address the increasing needs, in our case, the increasing shoppers who are walking into our door. In our case, our biggest funder was a logistics company, which was badly affected by COVID, which means that our numbers, our incoming, is not what it was before. So in terms of pain point, just being able to maintain sufficient income to address budget is our biggest concern.
Good, common concern, I'm sure. Emily.
You know, I don't think it's a secret that folks, you know, don't get into nonprofit work for the money.
For sure.
You know, nonprofit staff have historically been undercompensated. And this, quite frankly, is a big barrier to bringing qualified, diverse talent to organizations. You know, I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial. When I took over the Home at Voices, one of the things we did was recalibrate staff salaries to where they should be. And we did this for a lot of reasons, but the driver was to advocate, the driver was to advance equity and retain staff. And a lot of people said I was nuts for doing this because it required that we have a leaner but more highly compensated team. We're an organization that needs to push out and juggle a lot of work in order to have the kind of impact we strive for. So in that regard, we certainly punch above our weight class, but making this shift meant that the quantity and speed of our work would have to be scaled back and slowed down if we wanted to ensure quality. And that's a pretty big risk in a funder-driven ecosystem, right? It requires us to be more judicious in our choice points and honest with our funders that we can't do all the things. And this means that we can't chase or accept all the grants. And so I say this to say that, you know, I'm not surprised. We got to see the list of themes that were lifted up during the summer roundtable discussions. I'm not surprised by the majority of the themes. These are issues that the nonprofit sector at large have been talking about for some time now, just behind closed doors. You know, the current context of the economy gives us a framework to talk about them aloud. And ultimately, I think this is a good thing. You know, I know this is controversial because we've got some funders watching this, but I do think it's important to have this, you know, honest dialogue about how we got here. Inflation may be exacerbating the issues within our sector, but the fact of the matter is that the nonprofit industrial complex of producing ROI that is oftentimes unrealistic in order to meet revenue needs is really unsustainable. And so that's kind of why we're seeing what we're seeing. The silver lining for me is that maybe it will spark for folks within the basic needs nonprofit spaces, whether on the service side or funder side, that government systems have to change and that advocacy is a necessary parallel strategy.
You said a mouthful there on a lot of different fronts. You know, those of us who are in the business of providing services would love to pay our staff more, you know, at a heart level, just as we want our constituents to have an honest wage, sufficient wage. We certainly want our employees how did that work? Do you feel like you've got a more loyal base? Do you feel like they're going to be around for the long haul? What are the early indications there?
Oh, was that to me or to
Yeah,
Margaret?
that was to you, Emily.
Yeah, I think us kind of right setting salary scale certainly was one of the best things that we did, given the workforce situation that a lot of organizations are seeing themselves in. We've been able to retain staff, and that's a good thing for organizations to maintain stability, and also it helps create a really strong pipeline of qualified, diverse talent. We don't talk about this enough, but particularly for Black and Brown communities, you're having to pay down college debt, right? You're also having to often support, your family and your family's family, right? So there's more in wages that come to the choices that folks make when they're going into certain sectors, inclusive of, the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, sometimes we think we can't pay more, but maybe we can't afford not to. So I appreciate that philosophy and your daring approach to make it right. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, Margaret.
I think, it will come as no surprise to people that when it comes to our clients, a major choice that people are confronting is to pay the rent or to pay for anything else. The reality is that in Greater New Haven, rent went up on the order of 20% last year alone. For many of us who are homeowners and have a fixed housing cost, it can be kind of abstract to imagine what it is like to have your single biggest fixed cost go up by 20%. But as you mentioned, the parishioner that you're helping right now, it's a devastating situation for so many people, and we're going to see housing insecurity only going up, unfortunately. When you talk about the biggest choices our organization is facing, you have mentioned sort of the impact of inflation and increases in the minimum wage on our staffing ability. And the challenges around staffing aren't only about our staff and their need for a living wage, which is real. They should be adequately compensated for the significant and important work that they do in our community. We have about 150 full-time employees. We're not in a position to substantially change salaries without support from our biggest funders. And the impact of that really lands on our clients. And just to give you an example, for many, many years, Columbus House has run the overflow shelter in the winter. We open up a shelter that is strictly to get people out of cold weather. In the city of New Haven, there's 4 of those right now. We operate another one in Hamden, and we also operate a warming center in Middleton. So these are programs that are really logistically complicated. You stand them up in November, you hire and train a bunch of people. They have to work overnight. It's almost always someone's second or third job, and then you close it back down in the spring. And so that you have to hire people who are willing to take a temporary job that doesn't have benefits. And the reality is that without an insignificant investment from the state, we will not be able to continue to do those programs even next year. And I think the people on this call can imagine, to me, there's nothing much more basic than saying people in our community shouldn't die in the streets because it's cold out. I mean, it's a very fundamental, very, very fundamental need. And that's the reality of the kinds of choices we're confronting as organizations, because without the state funding that we've had over the last 3 years, the kinds of municipal and private grants that we operate on those programs for will no longer sustain the kind of wage costs that we have. And so, very, very serious service implications from the kinds of budgetary pressure that we have right now.
Seriously, sometimes the safety nets need a safety net. As our costs go up, as the expense of just doing business and providing basic needs escalates along with everything else in society. Case in point, we bought an outdoor freezer 2 years ago, needed another one. It was $10,000 more to buy the second identical outdoor freezer. and just symptomatic of what we're all experiencing, our constituents and ourselves as organizations. Serious need. So we are very thankful for Connecticut Food Share, United Way, for the Community Foundation, for those who are in the business of helping those who are in the business of helping people. So thanks to all of you and others perhaps on the line. Panelists, of all the things that we just discussed, would you say there are some things that are keeping you up at night? Maybe you already mentioned it. If not, what would you add to the list that hasn't been covered? We're talking about policy issues in a moment, but apart from that, what are you most concerned about right now?
Ian, I would say the cost of housing. I heard everything that Margaret said. I mean, there's almost no absolutes in the world here. I'd like to say you need a place to stay, but sadly in New Haven, not everyone has that. So you have to pay what it costs. The cost of living in apartments of residents keeps going up, and that is not offset by extra money coming into the houses which have to pay this. I mean, if I have to pay a little bit more in a spike in gas prices, okay, that's something I go with. But when you see these incremental to large increases across the spectrum in basic needs for any household, it's hard. I mean, you take energy costs that have been going up substantially as well, and you multiply these out by several categories, and it's very hard. So how does that affect in our world of food and clothing? It means the choices are sometimes made that healthy food isn't bought, it can't be afforded. In our case, we are struggling to maintain the same amount of food coming in from all of our sources. Our clothing area, which is very large, has an empty room right now. We haven't seen that. We've had, on average, 2 tons of clothing waiting to be sorted. Today, as of a few days ago, there were 6 bags in there. The demands for services, products, resources are outstripping supply. And the challenge is to offset that. So I suppose I stay up at night mostly thinking about where the money has to go. And I think that the housing, utilities, just transport, logistics piece is taking such a huge share, it stresses everything else. And the everything else bit is where we offer our primary services.
Absolutely. It's harder and harder to keep up with the demand, certainly understood. Emily? Well, if I've got another question, follow-up question for you specifically. So if you want to pass on this one or not.
No, I mean, I think that there's like a short answer and a long answer, and I'll just give the short answer, which is, coincidentally, the Fed is meeting today to the US to determine, how much more to raise interest rates, if at all. And at this point, I think without being or sounding alarmist, it's kind of inevitable that a recession is probably on our way. I think it's a question of how deep the recession is. And so my biggest worry is about the federal and state responses when this happens. This is centered in that if it's not aggressive enough, if it's not a strong enough response, if the idea is that we're gonna not push out the kind of resources that are necessary to support folks, that we will exacerbate what is currently, very, very wide income and racial income and wealth gaps, that the recovery is going to be, longer than the Great Recession's recovery. And that's a real worry for me, that we're going to just feel more of this for a much longer time.
Yeah. Yep. And choices that are going to be made at the governmental legislative levels too. You have a question I want to ask in a moment, but I want to get to Margaret too. The things that are keeping you up at night, maybe we've already mentioned them, maybe there's other things. Margaret?
I do want the people to know who are listening to this panel that it's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions. We are going to talk about that, but I will share a couple other things that are keeping me up at night. One is the rise in unsheltered homelessness. So in our sector, we use a lot of jargon, and one of the terms that we refer to is unsheltered homelessness, which is people who are living outside, who are living in places that aren't meant for human habitation. There's a lot of homelessness where people are doubled up with relatives, or they are staying over in an apartment from which they've been evicted, but they're not living outside. And we're really seeing an increase in the number of people who are unsheltered. And that's a phenomenon that's happening across the country, and it's happening here in Greater New Haven and across the state. The other is the increase in family homelessness. Right now in Greater New Haven, there are 50 families who are literally homeless on the shelter wait list, so waiting for a safe place to stay. That makes it hard to sleep. Makes it hard to sleep.
Margaret, we just read about the tent community in New Haven being dismantled. Any comments about why that was necessary, or what the options were for those folks?
I think the important thing for people to know is that encampments are a relatively small but very visible and disturbing manifestation of a much, much, much bigger crisis that we're experiencing in the lack of deeply affordable housing. The number of units that we would need to meet the housing demands of our state is on the order of 80,000. Like we talk about building, like, isn't it great that New Haven's adding hundreds of units? We're nowhere near the scale of housing that we need to be constructing. And so I think that supporting people who are living in encampments is incredibly important. It's part of Columbus House's mission, and it's something that we do every single day of the year. And people should understand that there are solutions to homelessness, and we should be focused on those things that we can do that will prevent people from ever needing to go into an encampment. That's the community that we want to live in. We know how to do that. And what we need is to build the political will, community investment to accomplish that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I just read a report from an organization called the Center for Renewing America. And you'll probably get the gist of where they were coming from the title of the document they produced. It was a budgetary recommendations as we looked at debt ceilings and budgets and Biden's budget and counter proposals and all of the debates that are going to go on that realm. But the document they produced is called A Commitment to End Woke and Weaponized Government. Pretty inflammatory government from my perspective that highlights budget reductions that this organization feels are necessary to get the country in what they believe is the right track. For example, one of the cuts that they recommend is to the Department of Health and Human Services. They're recommending a decrease from 2021 spending of 20%. So for 2023, they're recommending, not in the light of inflation and all of the other things that we discussed, they're recommending not an increase to the Department of Health and Human Services, but a 20% decrease. And for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they're recommending a 43% cut from 2021 spending. Choices. Again, we're talking about choices. Obviously, decisions to move in these directions would have some serious consequences for our most vulnerable population. So, Emily, I'll start with you on this. Based upon the pressures that would be coming to bear upon government at every level to maintain budgets, to manage budgets, to get us in a livable budgetary situation nationally and down through the legislative levels. What are the greatest threats and opportunities that you see arising at a policy level?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to give a little bit of my longer answer.
Sure, please.
To answer this from the last question. So we're talking about there's a lot of talk about inflation, right? Yes, we are in a moment of historic high inflation, but life, as you just mentioned, Pastor Foster, was a struggle for low income folks before inflation. The country as a whole, and Connecticut in particular, has seen rising income and wealth inequality, and we're at historic levels today, making the inflation harder for low and middle income residents. I think it's also important to remember that on top of this, the recovery from the pandemic hasn't felt like a recovery for folks that had unexpected medical expenses or lost a job. The pandemic wiped out savings for a good number of people. So even if you were relatively well off and had a child or children that you were saving money for college for, but fell into one of those two categories, your disposable income is greatly diminished, and the data backs this. So I'm saying that to say that, yes, inflation is bad, but we didn't just wake up and things were bad, right? Things were bad before inflation and things were bad before the pandemic. I think we're just talking about it more now because more of us are feeling the heat. And so I did talk a little bit about, that's the worry. We want to make sure that we're not, that the reaction by federal and state governments aren't through austerity measures. But to Margaret's point, there are some bright spots. I think that there are both, federal and state policy solutions and short-term and long-term policy solutions that can be addressed, that can address inflation. There are too many to name, but I'll try to hit some. At the federal level, I think one of the most important things Congress and the Fed can do is tackle corporate greed. The reality is that the only thing rising faster than inflation is corporate profit. Profit margins are the highest they've been in the US since the 1950s. And unfortunately, to our conversation about choices, right, the decisions that people in power are making over and over again tend to be those that are good for capital rather than what's good for workers. And so rather than reduce the workforce to cool inflation, I do hope that we see some federal policies that curb profiteering. TBD, right? At a state level, obviously we don't really have a say in how the Fed acts. So we should probably be more focused on, short-term and long-term policies to make Connecticut more affordable. Our state's budget is a statement of values. You heard me talk a little bit about, that we want at Voices children and families to feel and see through policy and dollars that they matter. So we have 4 major goals for this biennium budget, and that is to put more money in the pockets of hardworking families, build a strong and diverse workforce, create more affordable housing in every town across the state, ensure that every zip code has safe and healthy communities. But focusing on just housing as an example, Margaret talked about some of the data. You did too. The research is clear. We know that 39% of renters in the state who aren't current on rent payments feel like they could be evicted in the next 2 months. We know that rate is higher for Black renters at 54%, and 56% of Latina renters feel that they could be evicted in the next 2 months. We know that high absenteeism rates correlate with students facing housing insecurity. We know that housing impacts health and well-being, right? So these are all the problems that we know. The question is, what do we do about this? In the short term, the state could pass renter protections like rent caps so that rents don't increase exponentially. The state could also pass a state level child tax credit and fund Connecticut baby bonds so families have more flexible dollars. Simultaneously, we need to be looking at long-term solutions. So for example, indexing the income tax to inflation so that wage increases, particularly for folks in the lower and middle income brackets, are realized in terms of purchasing power. And we need to be looking at ways folks can earn a living wage, not just a minimum wage. We need land use reforms, to Margaret's point. And we need to be, ensuring that more resources available for the actual development of affordable housing across the spectrum. So there's a lot we can do. Like I said, there's too many solutions to name, but I will say that many of them have been lifted up this legislative session, which is really, really great. I think we'll have to continue to raise them and build public awareness and grow momentum, but I'm hopeful we can do this.
Good, good. Very, very good point. Someone just asked a question. I'll remind everyone in the audience that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. And here's one to put us in the right frame of mind, I think. What gives each of you hope? And what can I do as a concerned community member? Any thoughts on that, any of the panelists?
I would love
Yes.
to. Oh, sorry, Ian.
No, you go. You were first.
Thanks. I'm sure we'll both have our opportunity. I love that question. You could tell by my earlier response that I love to talk about the solutions. And when it comes to homelessness, there's tons of great news because we actually absolutely know how to address homelessness, and we know that it's possible to end homelessness. And we especially know that here in Connecticut, because this was one of only 2 states to have reached what's called functional zero on ending veteran homelessness. This happened in 2016. And basically, as a state working together, we were able to get to a point where we could identify and house any veteran who became homeless in a matter of months. And that was absolutely the manifestation of political will on the federal, state, and local part. And that the manifestation of that political will was because of people like the person who wrote the question in that chat box, right? It wasn't because we had presidents who really demanded that veterans be taken care of. It's because we had community members telling their representatives that veterans living on the streets of this country was a moral shame and unacceptable, because we had activists telling Congress people that they needed to address veteran homelessness. And when there was political will to address that problem, we were able as a community of providers to be incredibly organized in use data and communication to address that challenge. So I appreciate that everybody on this call is a donor. I'm also a donor. We have to do that. We have to share our own means with the people in our community who need it, but we also absolutely have to be politically involved. If we are not telling our representatives what our priorities are as voters, then we cannot expect that these problems will be meaningfully addressed.
Thank you. Activism, generosity, things that we can all become involved in. And I'll hit Emily with the activism role from her perspective. But Margaret, you had some, oh no, Ian, I'm sorry. Ian, you had some things to share.
Yeah, thank you. Quite a tall order of challenges that Emily set for the state, yes. I think that the resources that are available can be further tapped, and I'm talking about things like the networks of different nonprofits, the people on this call working together to share anything from best practices, challenges, new information, resources for either product or services. Of course, nobody shares their funders, but we can share the trends, the ideas. Okay, thank you. All the things that Community Foundation is trying to do. So I would suggest that all the things the Community Foundation does, perhaps there can be more. Perhaps they might touch different people. That's one opportunity I see. In our world of food pantry, soup kitchen, etc., there is a terrific organization in New Haven, CFAN, around, 60 organizations meeting monthly, sharing information, best practices. It's just an alliance of organizations. It's not formally structured. We're going through what do we do, how do we do it? And then, of course, that goes back to what is the resource, how's it going to be paid for, and all the rest of it. Other resources I see that can be shared are being able to show the names of organizations and individuals who can share specific products or skills or ideas or consulting. The first one that comes to my mind is Pro Bono Partner up in Hartford, offering free legal services to nonprofit organizations. In another nonprofit I'm on the board of, they helped substantially there, and I know that they're very helpful across the board. I think that each of our organizations has to look at line item by line item what we have, where can we maybe get a resource or a hand up to address it quickly. And it's what we all need, because if nothing else, it's for the encouragement, it's just to keep our spirits, our motivation up as well.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah, sharing services. You and I had a little conversation about that. There's much more that can be done. So activism, generosity, sharing resources. Emily, again, from your perspective, what is activism? What does effective activism look like in these days and times?
So it's a great question. Systems change, policy change work, whether local, state, or federal, require an array of partners in different lanes working together and moving people to action. Sometimes, these are the same actions and sometimes they aren't, but in successful, sustained efforts, the actions are always aligned. And that's the preface before answering your question, which is because at Voices, we're really clear about who we are and who we're not. We're not journalists, we're not activists, we're not funders, and we're not electeds. We are researchers and advocates. So we believe that when we advocate for, enact, and resource, a patchwork of research-based equitable policies, not just one or two, right, but a whole host of intersectional policies that build each legislative session, we do in fact get closer to the future we want. I think another way of saying this is that we aim for exponential change, but celebrate the incremental along the way. And so these are things, there are others, but these are things that differentiate advocates like us, researchers and advocates like us, from other actors in the spaces. I do think it is important to be clear that all of the actors in these spaces are critical and necessary in systems change and policy change work. But as researchers and advocates, we're mindful that we need to be impatient about injustice, but patient about strategy. And so our work focuses on powering movements with data, organizing with communities where we see a need, and partnering with values-aligned organizations to advance our aim toward economic justice. I think that it's really exciting to see so many organizations, so many movements partnering together, and that includes funders, just to be clear here, working right in the same direction to try to get a thing. I'd say the one thing that has given me a lot of hope is that we are not there yet, but we are really growing the number of people who understand that we need an abundance mindset about what's possible, rather than what we've traditionally been doing, which is this zero sum deficit thinking. If this issue gets funded, then my issue can't get funded, and instead I think really joining forces to say let's grow the pie rather than begging for the crumbs is the path forward. It's going to take a lot more work, but it's giving me a lot of hope these days to see more and more folks joining that way of thinking.
Love it, love it. So data is crucial. I mean, we appreciate the work of Data Haven. You all do research. How is that research disseminated? What can you put into our hands that can be useful for directing the courses of action that we all take? I guess with you again, as a research organization, what can you provide those of us who want to see positive change come about that would help us to move in these strategic directions that you spoke of?
Yeah, I would say, visit our website selfishly, right? www.ctvoices.org. I see Mark Abraham on the call. Data Haven is another excellent resource. Connecticut Data Collaborative is also another excellent resource. And each of the issues, housing, criminal justice, fair employment, early care, I see early care folks on the call. A lot of these organizations also do their own research. And so I would encourage folks to ask the organizations that they're familiar with for any documents that they may produce. And I'm sure they'd be willing to share those, but we certainly have an array of reports and fact sheets that are available and publicly posted on our website.
Awesome. Ian, you were talking about sharing resources. Somebody asked if we could put up the legal pro bono info that you made reference to. Maybe we can.
Okay, I will too.
Great. And we're looking for those questions and answers come in. We have a couple nitty gritty down where the rubber meets the road. Someone asked, are we trying to keep the bus fares free? Or is there nothing we can do about that? That has really helped a great number of people to be able to get to school or work or medical appointments. Crucial issue, very real issue. Anybody have anybody or even in the audience, if you put something into the chat? Does anybody have any, the skinny on the
I do
latest?
know that, Roland Lamar, who's from our region, is the chair of the transportation committee and made it clear in a piece in the Independent recently that maintaining free bus fare was not a priority for that committee. I don't expect, and I would assume Emily would have more insight into this than I do, but I don't expect that that's going to be something that is going to continue. And we certainly, in the service of people experiencing homelessness and very economically marginalized people, are absolutely desperate for there to be basically to have more access to bus passes for people who are on the extreme economic fringe, because this isn't a question of sort of getting people out of their cars and onto buses for purposes of climate improvement or traffic reduction. It's absolutely life or death to get to medical appointments. We have set up systems to support people who are very low income, and then they need to use the bus to access those systems, right? So you got to get to the apartment to see the apartment. You need to go over and see your case manager here and your mental health provider there. You need to be able to visit your mom. And all of those things require access to transportation. So I agree with your commenter that this is a really critical issue. And I hope that, given that I don't think we're going to see free bus passes writ large, that we can increase free bus access for people who are in really dire economic situations.
Thank you. Someone asked, let's see, what other case management services do your clients need most to get holistic support? For example, transportation, job skills, health, and mental health supports. Interestingly enough, and I speak for my own organization, wanting to do more. I think that's what all of us want to do. We want to really provide the wraparound services that do more than the basic, putting food in somebody's hands. One of the things that we actually, not going to promote myself, but we do pardon workshops. Somebody who has a criminal record over their head is going to have trouble getting an apartment. They're going to have trouble getting a job. And we've been successful in leading people through what can be a daunting process to obtain. They've been living a good life. They're clean. They're living healthy lifestyles, contributing to society, volunteering in organizations, and need that monkey off of their back, so to speak. So that's one of the things that we can do. We've also had the opportunity to provide some mental telehealth services to our clients and members of the church who are trying to expand into the client base too. But all of these things are necessary. And I know the rest of you probably have some comments there as well.
Ian, in Wallingford, we have an organization called the Wallingford Forum, which links together all the basic needs organization in our town, some surrounding towns. We meet at the library, another resource place in itself. And it really goes into the network, the resource that's available. It's really for those of us in our agencies, working with individuals, their families, referrals, and it's really making the right connection between the need and the available resource at that time.
Awesome. Anybody else? Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, your other questioner brought up transportation, which would have been one of my top three. So we provide at Columbus House a tremendous amount of case management. That's really our secret sauce. That is the core thing that we do, is that case management. But other things that we have to, weave in with that people lack include access to mental health care and substance use, assistance with substance use disorders. And I would say we have amazing healthcare partners in Greater New Haven, like really, really amazing healthcare partners. And we are far, 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 far ahead of a lot of our neighboring states or even the rest of the country in terms of our access to those services. And it's still not enough. And what we really need to see is those services being decoupled from the physical locations where they are and brought to the people where they need them. Because there's not only is transportation a barrier, but walking into a healthcare facility when maybe you haven't had access to a shower today, or this is an environment in which you don't feel comfortable for a number of reasons, is a barrier. And we really have to figure out how to make the licensure and the fee structures work so that mental health and substance use care can come to people who need it and be provided in places that they will access it.
Thank you. Someone just asked if Ian and I could share how we're working together. We aren't. We just were talking before this call and something came up. He got vans, I've got vans. We've got a need to move things around from here to there. And we're talking about possibilities down the road. So I don't want you to think we're hiding something from you. We just had an interesting conversation how we might be able to work together in the days ahead. Someone's asking if we have stats or comments about how all of this is affecting the senior population or people living on fixed incomes. Anything particularly regarding that segment of the population?
Ian, I would just say strong demand, often fixed incomes. All the challenges we've talked about for the last hour are affecting the kind of clients that we have. Our clients, unlike many in cities, are at least housed, but with all the challenges, it's particularly hard. And we're seeing an increasing number of older shoppers coming to our agency in the last 30 days with all the changes going on.
Awesome. So we're coming close to the end here. Hope this has been informative and useful for folks. This will be an ongoing dialogue, of course. From here, we're going to ask you to complete a survey at the end of the broadcast, of the simulcast, the webinar, and there will be a summary that is sent to you of the meeting and a recording of the meeting as well. Any parting comments as we close out here to the three panelists?
Really grateful for this chance, and I hope people who want to continue this conversation will feel comfortable reaching out to any of us. I'm sure we'd all welcome those follow-up conversations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just so many thanks to the Community Foundation for truly understanding what the needs are and helping to facilitate the dialogue, the sharing, the network, the information. So important.
Awesome. Thank you. Emily, final thought?
Just echoing Margaret and Ian, so grateful for the conversation and also to all the folks that have joined us both on the ground doing the work and also to our funders obviously we could not do this work without you.
That is for sure. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. I think it's been a well-spent hour. I hope you felt the same way, and you'll be hearing more in the days to come. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.